I've lived in Ravenswood my entire life, surrounded by the familiar comforts of small-town America. The streets are lined with oak trees that cast long shadows in the afternoon sun, and the houses seem to lean in, as if sharing secrets. It's a place where everyone knows each other's names, and the local diner serves as the town's gathering spot. I've grown accustomed to the predictability of it all: the weekly high school football games, the annual summer fair, and the annual snowfall that brings the town to a standstill. But tonight was different. The sky was an inky black, like someone had poured coal dust over the horizon. The wind whispered through the trees, rustling leaves and sending shivers down my spine. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was just another storm. After all, Ravenswood gets its fair share of rain, but this one felt off. The air was heavy with anticipation, like the whole town held its breath in expectation of something. I checked the weather app on my phone for what felt like the 100th time, and sure enough, it was a low-pressure system moving in from the west. A storm warning flashed on the screen, but I knew this wasn't just any ordinary rain. There was a sense of foreboding that settled over me, like a cold sweat trickling down my back. I tried to distract myself by watching an old rerun of The X-Files, but even Mulder and Scully's eerie adventures couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. As I lay in bed, listening to the storm rage outside, I couldn't help but wonder what lay beyond the familiar streets of my hometown. As I lay in bed, listening to the storm rage outside, I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But as the rain intensified, strange occurrences started to happen. At first, it was just faint whispers in the wind, a soft mmm that sounded almost human. I turned off the TV and listened intently, wondering if anyone else could hear it. The sound seemed to come from all directions at once, making my skin crawl. I got out of bed to check on my neighbor's cat, Whiskers, who was known for meowing incessantly when there was a storm outside. To my surprise, the windows were open, and Whiskers' eyes glowed like lanterns in the dark. She sat calmly on the windowsill, watching the rain with an unnerving intensity. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that she wasn't even looking at the storm. She was staring straight through it. The air seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy, and I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was awakening in Ravenswood. I tried to convince myself it was just the storm playing tricks on me, but deep down, I knew better. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of voices that sounded like they were coming from all directions at once. It was then that I realized I wasn't alone in feeling this sense of unease. My parents had always warned me about the supernatural forces lurking just beyond our town's borders, the old stories of rituals performed in the dead of night, and ancient deities stirring in their slumber. I scoffed at the idea as a child, but now, with the storm raging outside and my neighbor's cat watching me with an unblinking gaze, I couldn't help but wonder if there was truth to it all. As the storm intensified, the violence escalated. More and more residents succumbed to the horrors unleashed by the rainfall. I saw Mrs. Jenkins, our elderly neighbor, stumbling out of her house in the middle of the night, her eyes wild with fear as she screamed at the top of her lungs. She was never seen again. The next morning, the police found her car abandoned on the side of the road, the engine still running, but there was no sign of Mrs. Jenkins herself. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. I also saw Tom Harris, our young neighbor, being dragged away by an unseen force. His friends reported that he was screaming and kicking, but when they went to look for him, he was gone. The police found his phone on the ground, the screen shattered with a single text message: "Get out while you still can." As the days passed, more and more residents disappeared or were found dead. The town was plunged into chaos, with no one knowing what was happening or who was behind it. The rainfall showed no signs of letting up, and the air was thick with an eerie, unnatural energy. I saw people committing atrocities against each other, as if possessed by some kind of dark force. They were like zombies, driven solely by a primal urge to harm and destroy. The town was descending into madness, and I felt like I was trapped in a nightmare from which I couldn't wake up. The rainfall seemed to be the catalyst for this chaos, and I knew that I had to find a way to stop it before it was too late. As the storm raged on, I saw a figure appear in town, seemingly unhurried by the torrential rain. The figure was androgynous, with features that blurred together into an indistinct mass. They moved with an unnatural gait, as if their limbs were not quite attached to their body. Despite the chaos around them, they seemed to be going about their business, their intentions unclear. I watched in rapt attention as they interacted with the remaining survivors, their words and actions sending shivers down my spine. The figure's presence was like a cold breeze on a winter's night. It made me feel alive, but also terrified. They seemed to be studying us, trying to understand what we were capable of. I saw them watching Sarah, our young nurse, as she tried to care for the wounded. She looked up at the figure with a mix of fear and curiosity, unsure whether they meant harm or not. The figure's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in their gaze, something that might have been recognition, but it was impossible to say for certain. Sarah took a step back, her hand on the knife she wore at her belt. The figure didn't react, but instead continued to observe us with an unnerving intensity. It was as if they were waiting for something or someone. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that we might not be alone in this storm after all. As I watched the stranger move through town, I began to notice strange occurrences around them. Graffiti appeared on the walls, messages scrawled in cryptic letters that seemed to shift and writhe like living things. The words themselves were impossible to decipher, but they seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy that made my skin crawl. I saw bodies move beyond recognition, their limbs twisted at unnatural angles as if they had been molded into grotesque poses. It was as if the stranger was warping reality itself, bending it to their will like a puppeteer manipulating strings. The air around them seemed to grow colder, an overwhelming atmosphere of terror and despair that clung to me like a shroud. I felt my heart racing in my chest, my breath catching in my throat as I tried to comprehend what was happening. The stranger's presence was like a cancer, spreading its dark influence through the town like a contagion. And yet, despite the fear that gripped me, I couldn't look away. I was transfixed by the stranger's movements, mesmerized by their power and their control. They seemed to be drawing us towards them, pulling us into some kind of abyss from which there was no escape. The graffiti messages seemed to be changing, rearranging themselves into new and more disturbing phrases that made my blood run cold. I saw words like, "They will not be saved," and "The end is near," scrawled across the walls in letters that seemed to burn with an inner fire. The stranger's eyes gleamed with a malevolent intelligence as they watched us, their gaze piercing through me like a cold wind. And then, in an instant, everything went black. Sleep paralysis strikes several residents, causing vivid nightmarish visions that seem all too real. The account explores the psychological toll this takes on those affected. As I lay there, unable to move or speak, I felt a presence hovering over me. It was as if someone was standing beside my bed, watching me with an unblinking gaze. But when I tried to scream, my voice was frozen in my throat. The vision shifted and distorted like a reflection in rippling water. I saw myself walking down a dark alley, the walls closing in on me from all sides. Every step I took felt heavy, as if my feet were weighted with lead. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw them figures lurking just beyond the edge of perception. They didn't seem to be looking at me, but rather, they seemed to be looking right through me. The vision shifted again, and I was back in my bed, gasping for breath. But the fear lingered, echoing in my mind like a refrain. As the days passed, more and more people came down with sleep paralysis. It was as if some kind of psychological contagion had taken hold, spreading its dark influence through our town like a virus. I saw friends and neighbors, once sound and strong, now racked by fear and anxiety. They would wake up in the dead of night, screaming and trembling with terror. And when they finally came to, they were left feeling shaken and disturbed, as if they had been to a place that no one should ever have to visit. I tried to talk to them, to offer what little comfort I could, but it was hard to know what to say. Sleep paralysis is a mysterious thing, full of twists and turns that defy explanation. It's like trying to grasp a handful of sand. The harder you squeeze, the more it slips through your fingers. One by one, the people who had been afflicted began to share their visions with me. They spoke of dark figures lurking in the shadows, of feeling watched and followed wherever they went. Some reported seeing strange symbols etched into the walls, pulsing with a malevolent energy. And then there were those who spoke of hearing voices, whispers in their ears, urging them towards some unknown fate. As I listened to their stories, I began to realize that sleep paralysis was not just a physical phenomenon, but also a psychological one. It's as if the line between reality and nightmare had become blurred, leaving us vulnerable to all manner of terrors. And then there were those who spoke of something more, a presence that lurked just beyond the edge of perception, waiting to pounce on its next victim. I'm not sure what's going on in our town anymore. I don't know what's real and what's not. All I know is that sleep paralysis has taken hold, and it's spreading its dark influence far and wide. As the storm raged on, I began to experience sleep paralysis myself. I felt a presence hovering over me, watching me with an unblinking gaze. But when I tried to scream, my voice was frozen in my throat. The vision shifted and distorted, like a reflection in rippling water. I saw myself walking down a dark alley, the walls closing in on me from all sides. Every step I took felt heavy, as if my feet were weighted with lead. And then out of the corner of my eye, I saw them figures lurking just beyond the edge of perception. They didn't seem to be looking at me, but rather, they seemed to be looking right through me. The vision shifted again, and I was back in my bed, gasping for breath. But the fear lingered, echoing in my mind like a refrain. As the days passed, more and more people came down with sleep paralysis. It was as if some kind of psychological contagion had taken hold, spreading its dark influence through our town like a virus. I saw friends and neighbors, once sound and strong, now racked by fear and anxiety. They would wake up in the dead of night, screaming and trembling with terror. And when they finally came to, they were left feeling shaken and disturbed, as if they had been to a place that no one should ever have to visit. One by one, the people who had been afflicted began to share their visions with me. They spoke of dark figures lurking in the shadows, of feeling watched and followed wherever they went. Some reported seeing strange symbols etched into the walls, pulsing with a malevolent energy. And then, there were those who spoke of hearing voices and whispers in their ears, urging them towards some unknown fate. As I listened to their stories, I began to realize that sleep paralysis was not just a physical phenomenon, but also a psychological one. It's as if the line between reality and nightmare had become blurred, leaving us vulnerable to all manner of terrors. And then, there were those who spoke of something more, a presence that lurked just beyond the edge of perception, waiting to pounce on its next victim. I decided to investigate further, to try and uncover the source of this strange phenomenon. I began by examining the graffiti that had been appearing all over town. The symbols etched into the walls seemed to be some kind of code, but I couldn't decipher their meaning. They appeared to be a mix of ancient languages, each one more mysterious than the last. And then there were the messages scrawled across the walls in red ink. They seemed to be taunting us, daring us to try and uncover the truth. "They're watching you," one read. "You can't escape." Another, "The figure is coming for you." I felt a chill run down my spine as I gazed upon these messages. Who was behind them, and what did they want from us? As the events escalated further, the survivors became increasingly paranoid and desperate. They turned against each other in a bid for survival, leading to tragic consequences. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was watching me from the shadows, waiting for its next victim. Every night, I fell into a deep sleep, only to be jolted awake by the same terrifying vision, myself walking down a dark alley, with figures lurking just beyond the edge of perception. But this time, I wasn't alone. The others were there too, their eyes black as coal, their skin gray and decaying. They reached out to me, their bony fingers grasping for my throat like skeletal hands. I tried to scream, but my voice was lost in the darkness. And then I was back in my bed, gasping for breath. But the fear lingered, echoing in my mind like a refrain. The others were getting worse, their behavior more and more erratic. They would lash out at each other, their hands flying with a ferocity that made me question whether they were even human anymore. I tried to stay away from them, but it was hard to avoid the feeling of being watched all the time. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the wind outside made me jump. I knew I had to get out of there, to find a way to escape this nightmare before it was too late. But where could I go? The streets were empty, the houses abandoned. It was as if the whole town had been consumed by some kind of dark magic. And then I saw them, a group of people standing outside my house, their eyes glowing in the dark like embers from a fire. They didn't move or speak, but I knew they were waiting for me. I tried to run, but my legs were heavy, as if rooted to the spot. The figure loomed closer, its presence filling the air with an unspeakable horror. And then everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the floor, my head throbbing with pain. The others were gone, but the messages remained scrawled across the walls in red ink. They seemed to be taunting me, daring me to try and uncover the truth. "You'll never escape," one read. "The figure will consume you." I knew then that I had to find a way out of this place before it was too late. But how? The darkness closed in around me like a living thing, and I knew that I was running out of time. I spent every waking moment researching the symbols, poring over ancient texts, and scouring the internet for any mention of similar markings. And then it happened. I stumbled upon an obscure forum where users were discussing a mysterious force that seemed to be awakened by the storm. The more I read, the more I realized that these symbols were just the tip of the iceberg. They were connected to an ancient lore that spoke of a world beyond our own, a realm where the laws of physics were mere suggestions, and the fabric of reality was twisted beyond recognition. As I delved deeper into the mystery, I began to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. The symbols seemed to be seeping into my dreams, haunting me with visions of dark forests and twisted cities. I started to question whether I was truly seeing things, or if it was all just a product of my own fevered imagination. But the more I doubted myself, the more I felt like I was being pulled towards some unknown truth. The storm raged on outside, its fury intensifying with every passing day, and I knew that I was running out of time. If I didn't uncover the secrets of this ancient force, it would consume me whole. I spent long hours huddled in my room, surrounded by candles and books, trying to piece together the fragments of a forgotten history. The symbols seemed to be leading me on a wild goose chase, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that I was getting closer to something. And then, just as I thought I had finally cracked the code, everything went black. When I came to, I found myself standing in a room that didn't seem to exist. It was like a mirror image of my own bedroom, but with walls made of darkness and furniture that seemed to be carved from shadow itself. The air was thick with an otherworldly energy, and I knew that I had finally stumbled into the heart of the mystery. But as I looked around in awe, I realized that I wasn't alone. There were others here too, figures shrouded in darkness who seemed to be watching me with cold, calculating eyes. And then, everything went black again. The door creaked open, revealing a room that seemed frozen in time. The air was thick with dust, and the walls were adorned with symbols that seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest. The symbols seemed to be everywhere, etched into the walls, carved into the furniture, even tattooed onto the skin of the figures standing before me. They were a language unlike any I had ever seen, a twisted mix of ancient runes and hieroglyphs that seemed to hold secrets beyond human comprehension. As I delved deeper into the room, I began to notice that the symbols were not just random markings. They seemed to be telling a story, a tale of sacrifice and ritual that sent shivers down my spine. I saw images of humans being led to their deaths, their bodies carved up with precision and care. I saw buildings that seemed to be constructed from human bones, their walls adorned with symbols that seemed to whisper a dark incantation. And through it all, the feeling of being trapped in a living nightmare lingered, a sense of claustrophobia that threatened to suffocate me at every turn. The figures before me seemed to be watching me, their eyes gleaming with an otherworldly intensity as they whispered a single word: "Welcome." I tried to run, but my feet seemed rooted to the spot. The symbols seemed to be closing in around me, trapping me in a world of horrors beyond human comprehension. And then, just as I thought all was lost, I saw it, a door that seemed to lead out of this living hell, a portal to a world beyond the veil of reality. But as I reached for the handle, I felt a hand on my shoulder, a cold, bony finger digging into my skin. "You should not have come here," a voice whispered in my ear, its words sending shivers down my spine. "Now you will never leave." I took a deep breath and stepped forward, my eyes locked on the figure shrouded in mystery. It was a being unlike any I had ever seen. Its presence seemed to fill the room, making it hard to breathe. The air was heavy with an otherworldly energy, and I could feel the weight of the horror that lurked within. As I approached, the figure slowly began to take shape, its features becoming clearer with each passing moment. It was a woman, her skin deathly pale, her eyes black as coal. She seemed to be made of shadows, her presence weaving in and out of the darkness like a living thing. I felt a shiver run down my spine as she reached out a hand, her fingers extending like dark tentacles. "You should not have come here," she whispered, her voice like a cold breeze on a winter's night. "But since you have, let us begin." She raised her hand, and the room seemed to darken, as if the very light itself was being extinguished. I felt myself being pulled towards her, drawn into a world of horrors beyond human comprehension. And then, in an instant, everything went black. When I came to, I found myself back in my own bed, the symbols etched into the walls of the room before me fading away like mist in the sun. But as I looked up at the ceiling, I saw something that made my blood run cold, a message scrawled across the wall in letters that seemed to burn with an inner fire. The horror is within. I stood amidst the ruins of the town, my mind reeling from the horrors I had witnessed. The streets were littered with debris, the buildings reduced to rubble, and the once clear river now choked with the blood of the dead. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of trauma, struggling to comprehend what had happened during the blood rain fall. Had it been the supernatural force that brought destruction upon us, or was it something within my own mind? The lines between reality and madness blurred as I looked around at the devastation. Every building, every street, every face seemed to hold a secret, a reminder of the terror that had consumed our town. I saw the faces of those who had fallen, their eyes frozen in perpetual fear, their skin smeared with blood and dirt. I heard the screams of the living, their voices echoing through my mind like a cacophony of terror. And yet, amidst all this chaos, I felt a sense of detachment, as if I was observing it all from outside my own body. It was as if I had become a ghost, a specter haunting the ruins of our town, searching for answers to questions that might never be answered. The wind howled through the streets, carrying with it the whispers of the dead, their voices begging me to remember, to recall the truth about what had happened during that fateful night. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the cacophony of terror, but the images remained etched in my mind, a constant reminder of the horrors that I had witnessed. And when I finally opened them again, I saw it, a figure standing in the distance, watching me with an unblinking gaze. It was the woman from the other world, her eyes burning with an inner fire, her presence radiating an aura of malevolence. She beckoned to me, her hand extended like a bony finger, and I knew that I had to follow her to see where she would lead me next.